Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hacktoberfest Help Desk. My name is Joe. Let me get my fancy banner. Here we go. Look at that. My name is Joe. I run community here at raise.dev, and I'm super excited to be bringing you the second of our Hacktoberfest Help Desks for the day. So before we welcome our special guest, who, if you're following us on Twitter, there's no point me being mysterious about. We've announced it many a times. Before I welcome Wilhelm onto the show, I want to run you briefly through what it is we're doing here and what is going to happen today. So if you're not aware, it is Hacktoberfest. Hacktoberfest is a celebration of open source where the hope is that we'll be able to welcome some new contributors and help encourage some new contributions from existing contributors and help open source and make some really great contributions throughout the month. We're going to talk a little bit about Hacktoberfest and how it's going with Wilhelm in a bit. But we decided this year as raise.dev, given that our whole thing is coaching and helping you take the next steps in your career, that we would give a helping hand during Hacktoberfest and help you land your pull requests. So as you have issues with the issues that you're looking to contribute to, as you have problems with your issues and with your pull requests this Hacktoberfest, if you need help, whether those be high-level questions about how to get started or what projects get started on, or if you need help with a specific question and a specific piece of code, we can help you either way. All you need to do is pop over to our Hacktoberfest Help Desk website and submit your question there on the top. From that site, you can also subscribe to be notified when we go live. We are going to be going live with the Help Desk 3 times a day to make sure that everyone possible is able to tune in at least once. And when you submit a question to us, what we will do is review that question. We will send you an email about when we're going to be covering that question on the show. And after the show, we will send you the recording where your question was answered. So that's how it all works. Briefly, for those of you who aren't familiar with raise.dev, we are brand new. We launched this week. Basically, we are here to help you take the next steps in your career via coaching. So you sign up to raise.dev and you get matched with a coach, someone who will mentor you and help you with the whatever you're trying to achieve in your software development career, whether that be getting a new job or getting a promotion in your existing one or completing a project. We're aiming for people who already have some development experience, and that doesn't mean you have to be a super hotshot developer, just that you are reasonably comfortable in at least one programming language and you're looking to further your skills. If you're looking to learn programming from scratch, there are tons of resources for doing that. But we are here to help you level up the skills that you already do have. So that is raise.dev. Let's get on with the Hacktoberfest show. So please welcome Mr. Wilhelm Klopp to the stream. Let me get his fancy banner.
Hello.
There we go. Hello, Wilhelm. So
good afternoon.
I've known Wilhelm a really long time from student communities, from GitHub, but why don't you introduce yourself to folks before I start rambling about
Yeah, for sure. We've definitely known each other for a while. So brief intro to what I'm doing right now. So I run my own company. Simple Poll is the main kind of product that we develop. It's an app for Slack that lets you do polls with your coworkers to kind of save time on how long it takes you to make a decision, to bring your team together in kind of a remote context. And yeah, we're also dabbling with lots of other many things at the same time. I think when I left GitHub around a year ago, I kind of said something along the lines of, I'm going to focus full-time on side projects now. Right. So that's kind of true in some ways. But yeah, thank you so much
for just all those side projects happen to be businesses. Well, no, thank you so much for being here. And I do have to warn the viewers that Wilhelm being on the show is a great example of how the show has an alternate agenda, which is like all the conferences have been cancelled this year. So normally I would catch up with so many great people during conference travels and events, and I can't do that. So I'm just inviting them all to the show instead. So me and Will, I'm going to have a great catch up about what we've been doing recently.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great excuse. Perfect second agenda, I think.
So yeah, we'll definitely get into some of the additional projects that have come out of Simple Poll. If you are in a Slack that doesn't have Simple Poll, that would be surprising to me. It's literally everywhere. So we definitely want to talk about Simple Poll and how Simple Poll happened and your journey as a student getting into open source. It's obviously very core to the show.
Yeah, I think it's actually, the story is very related to what this is all about and learning and being part of a community. So yeah, no, we should definitely talk about that.
Awesome, cool. Well, first of all, I do have to raise attention to something. The show was almost late because Will had a very special thing to prepare. We're doing the stream all October, and Will, how are you getting yourself through COVID in these tough times?
Yeah, so
you've picked up a new hobby, right?
I don't know if I call it a hobby. I think if I call it a hobby, I think that would offend a lot of people who are really into artisanal coffee making. Right. I got a coffee machine as a gift a while back, and I used to not think too much of it because I could just go to Starbucks, right, and get my coffee there. But now during lockdown, it's been kind of instrumental in keeping myself happy and giving me my my pumpkin spice latte, every day.
It is probably October. Wilhelm's got pumpkin spice lattes on the go.
Yeah, I will say though, the way it works is you buy the syrup from Amazon or any shop, right? Like the same syrup that Starbucks uses. I will say that the pumpkin spice syrup depletes a lot more quickly than the caramel syrup. So, Starbucks, if you're watching, please get on that.
Well, maybe that's by design. Like the pumpkin spice latte is meant to be a full only drink. You don't get to keep the syrup. You have to get through it quick.
It's a special 3-month treat every year, and then once it's over, you have to wait. Yeah, fair. I see that logic, Starbucks.
The last of my coffee beans for the day, and I just want to. I have this thing which I don't know if anyone can relate to. I like to collect objects which are cursed and have done some harm to me in the future. So I have this lovely coffee mug from a cafe in Nepal, where I got the worst case of food poisoning I've ever had in my life. And this is one of many coffee mugs I have that have hurt me deeply. I like to drink from these cups to remind myself of those good times. Anyway, so let's get into the stream.
That's a nice way of getting past the curse.
Exactly, yeah. So we're here to talk about Hacktoberfest. And for a lot of people, especially this early in the month, they're probably still looking for their issues and which projects they're going to contribute to. So I want to start a little bit on, I guess, when you were first starting out, tell us where you were in life and what your first open source contribution was.
Oh, if you can remember. Wow, that's a great question. Okay, yeah. I think I might be getting the date slightly off, but I think this was 2014 or 2015 or something like that. And I kind of knew of open source maybe vaguely. So at this point, I was kind of finishing up school, not in university yet, but I knew I was kind of vaguely interested in this technology stuff and this programming stuff. I'd done some programming before in PHP, and I kind of really enjoyed it, even though I I didn't necessarily have anyone to share that joy with like just yet. I feel like I don't know how common this is actually. I think it's quite easy to forget, as soon as you enter a job that there's probably a lot of young people who are maybe super into this thing, but like none of their friends are, or they don't know how to like find each other.
Yeah.
And I think actually Hacktoberfest is quite a nice way to get around that, because I remember all of the like first 20 repos that I made on GitHub or anything like that, they all had 0 stars, and I was like, what? Like, is my stuff not valuable? Like, why did I have any stars? And obviously that's like a silly thought to have, but I think it's nice to have like a little bit of community, a little bit of like a friendship group to build sort of stuff with. And in some ways, I think Hacktoberfest can help a lot with that.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's kind of not answering your question. So
I think it's a great point. I definitely like when I first got into coding, I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time, but like I was running some game servers with some friends, and like we had a forum, a PHP forum, and so I was dabbling with that, and like they didn't care about that at all. They were just there for the games. I was like, oh, but this bit's quite cool. Nope, games. So yeah, I definitely sympathize with that.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think the first I think the very first open source contribution I ever ended up making was around the Pebble watch. I don't know if you remember this.
I do remember Pebble watch.
This was like a very big deal. I think Kickstarter, like 2012 Kickstarter, I was like super hyped. This fancy new watch. This was way before smartwatches were a thing. It had like this e-paper display. You could like send notifications to. It was awesome.
It was a super neat device.
Yeah, I tried to get on that super quickly. I think I like didn't participate in the first Kickstarter, but like pre-ordered it, and then at some point it arrived, and then there was like a development platform for that.
Right.
And I think it only supported like C. And I actually tried like a few times to make an app using C. Like I think I probably tried like 5 times. And I just can't like write code at C. Like it's just not like I do not understand it, or I don't want to spend the time with it.
There's just so much going on. Like at my university, the first thing we do was ARM assembly and C side by side.
Lovely.
And I remember this like deep fear. Like we were doing it. We had an emulator for the ARM, and so like nothing could go wrong. But like I remember in like when the professor introduced the emulator we're using, he was like, "Oh yeah, we've got an emulator because if you did this on actual board, you would all blow it up." And I was just like, "Oh, what a welcoming introduction to programming, everyone!"
Isn't that nice?
Yeah. So sorry, I completely interrupted. So you were trying to do Pebble in C.
Yeah, I was trying to build stuff around Pebble. I still think it's a great watch, and very sad to see that it ended up kind of not working out for that company. But yeah, so I couldn't really make an app for Pebble because I didn't want to do the whole C thing. But the way you'd build these apps was actually there was this like online IDE called Cloud Pebble.
Yeah.
And I noticed one small bug while I was kind of playing around with it, which was that there was like at some point you had to like enter like a code you got on your phone or something on the site, like some kind of SMS 2-factor verification thing.
Yeah.
And it was like all numbers. And then, but on mobile, the keyboard that would come up was like the standard keyboard. Even though I'd learned at some point, I think that with like HTML5, you can like change the input type so that it's just numbers. Sorry, letters and numbers was the one that had. So my first open source contribution was like I think literally like a 3-line change to change the input type from like text to tel. And then that had like a marginally improved user experience for people who went down that particular user flow in the Cloud Pebble online IDE for people who are building Pebble apps.
That's awesome, though. That's such a like great and impactful contribution. And like one to a platform you were using. That's super rad.
Right. Yeah. Which I think that's probably like I think a lot of open source maintainers kind of recommend that, or like a path similar to that, like use our thing and then see what is like has friction
see
about
what's
it.
broken and what you have issues with. Yeah.
Yeah. Then you can make a change as opposed to trying to pick up some random thing where you maybe don't understand like the full context.
For sure. So there's a thread there that we'll come back to in a moment. That topic of making contributions to things that you've used before and things that you know. I'm sure everyone who is in this stream has seen the drama on the internet today about Hacktoberfest. We'll come back to that in that topic. Let me quickly make a note in my special book. But I do want to talk about instead that experience of making that contribution. So you've been using this thing, and then you turn around and do a contribution to it. What was that experience like? Like, how did you go about like even starting that and walking into this project and saying, "Hey, I have a change to make"?
Yeah, it's a great question. because there's actually like a lot of friction around it, I feel like, and probably still, but so I knew that I had to change this like 3 characters somewhere, and I couldn't quite figure out where, and I think eventually I found it.
Right.
And then at this point, I had like never cloned like a Git repository. I think I had done a lot of the like download as zip and then sort of opened it in Notepad++. That was kind of my workflow back then. And still with this, I didn't really know anything about how Git worked. So I think I played around with like the GitHub web interface. So forked it, then edited it on my fork, and then like tried to, and then submitted like a PR back to the original thing. So I had never like set up the project locally, never tried to run that app locally to see if the change actually worked.
Right.
And I think then maybe it was via like with an interaction with the maintainer, or maybe I realized it myself, although I'm kind of doubtful of that there was actually like the change wasn't really complete. Like it didn't quite work because of some other related CSS thing.
Right.
And then I had to fix that as well. I mean, I should probably just try and find this PR. I don't think it's like.
Oh, that'd be amazing if you can still find this PR. That'd be spectacular. That might have to be a regular segment, finding like people's first PRs. So while you're looking for that, we had a question from Shock Trooper saying, "What was your first contribution to open source?" Which they tagged RaiseDev. So I assume they're asking me because we already spoke about your one. Mine was really uninteresting, Shock Trooper. Mine was fixing a line of documentation in a Haskell package. The package was called Servant. It's a web framework where you generate the API endpoints based on type descriptions. And I did a very minor documentation fix. And that was my contribution. And my first meaningful contribution was probably to a PayPal SDK, which I worked at PayPal at the time. So even less exciting. Definitely not as cool as Wilhelm's story.
I just dropped it in the Twitch chat.
Oh no, Nightbot banned you. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me redo that.
Oh no,
we have unfortunately the internet can't be trusted with links. So there you go. I've put it on the screen.
Oh wow. Okay.
Folks want to grab that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, you've been banned by our Twitch bot. So awesome, super cool. So so that's the first PR. So I guess that has the conversation where the maintainer's like, "Hey, you haven't finished. Get back in there."
Yeah. So definitely, I did not realize this myself. The maintainer told me, and also pointed out how she hadn't actually seen the bug because I think she was on iOS, I was on Android or something like that. And on iOS it didn't happen, and on Android it did happen. So I think that's also probably a nice pointer for like people on different platforms noticing like different kinds of bugs help like make things better for everyone.
Right.
And then, I think this is also super interesting. Just before getting this up, I remembered the other part of submitting this was how I remembered that it just took forever to get merged. Like I finished it to the required like level of everyone's satisfaction. But I remember it took forever to get merged. And looking at it now, it took like 10 days to merge. So it definitely did not take forever.
But it feels like forever when you've done it, right?
Right. You're like not sure like what's going to happen next. And I think that's another interesting point about like open source in general and how I think especially as a new contributor, it's kind of a little bit of a new experience in some ways because you don't yet have an appreciation for the like workload and priorities of the maintainers, and you just know you've done this thing, and you want to know what happens next. You want someone to acknowledge the work you've done and bring it into the project. So I think I was like starting to ask and follow up like, hey, can we like merge this, even though I don't think that was probably justified.
Yeah, which is like a hot topic I think in Hacktober, especially this year. So like Hacktober as well, on top of all those things you've mentioned, then adds this time pressure where it's like you need to have 4 of these, well, at least 5 of these things done over the course of a month. So now that that was your first contribution. Obviously, now you've had a bit of experience on the other side as a maintainer. Which projects have you kind of been in that driver's seat in where you're the one reviewing the PRs?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like my experience there is definitely still quite limited. So but there's two main things I suppose that come to mind. One is during university, I started this project called UCL API. So I went to a university called UCL in London, and as part of kind of going there and doing a lot of stuff around like the kind of technology society where I first met Joe, or throughout which through which I first met Joe, we ended up creating this API for the university. So the idea was,
Right.
as students, we have to use all of these university systems all the time. So for example, the online learning system, the system for booking rooms, the system for viewing your timetable, and they tend to all be a bit antiquated and slow, and you can't automate stuff. And we were really wanting to automate everything, so we decided to kind of try and build an API, and that ended up working out quite nicely. And as part of that, there's now this kind of still an ongoing effort where a group of students are maintaining this open source API repository, or actually a couple of them. And I think that was probably my first experience.
Cool.
It's kind of. I feel very proud of that.
It's an awesome project, and one that, like, I feel like there's so many university IT infrastructure is one of these fascinating things where, like, every university in the country has broadly the same things they need from this technology, broadly the same systems, and yet like, if it's not some terrifying, huge, incompetent vendor, it's something rolled entirely in-house and like completely proprietary. And so that it makes sense that there's an open source drive to standardize some of those systems, right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I don't actually think we got that many outside contributions for this one. So I think for that one, it was probably more my first experience of like, I guess, like managing an engineering team. So we were more like part-time. So it wasn't definitely not really like a proper, like, engineering manager style job. But it was kind of fun, figuring out, okay, how can we split up the load, like planning out different things, also planning with an eye towards like the IT department and kind of how they could help us, or where there'd be kind of, problematic areas that maybe we'd have to have a lot of their help with to kind of ship a certain thing. But that was, I think I'd count that, and that's all open source still. Although not too many outside contributions, although I think there are some occasionally now. And then the other main kind of open source project where I have like reviewed external pull requests and kind of responded to issues was the GitHub Slack integration, which I was kind of working on from, when was it? I think it was September 2017 until probably like May 2018.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
So that's at github.com/integrations/Slack. And that was kind of my main job at GitHub during that time period, was kind of building this, shipping, maintaining this integration. And we decided as part of that, we want this to be like an open source thing. We think it's helpful for other people who are building on top of the GitHub API to have some reference of how people actually use the API in production, and kind of what some of the challenges around that might be. There's the great Probot framework kind of was starting to become more popular during that time, and the Slack integration
Do you want to tell folks
was
what
or still
is?
Yeah, sorry. So Probot is what's the best way to describe it? It's a really straightforward way of automating the GitHub API using like Node.js code.
And it's, I guess, like the other half of Probot as well, is like, it's a bot framework in itself that you can use to automate your tasks, but then the Probot team help the discoverability of existing Probots, and you can just one-click install them. So, for example, a really popular one is like the stale issues one, which will close issues that aren't answered after a certain time. And if you want that functionality, you can just go to the Probot website and install it with one click. So it's both like a framework you can use to automate stuff, and also kind of like a marketplace of existing automations that open source maintainers use and share. So
and also very much inspired like GitHub Actions sort of as a thing, which is probably not to be underestimated, the impact that Probot had there.
For sure. It's an interesting thing. Sorry, maybe we'll come back to this later, but like, it's an interesting thing.
Please go for it.
Where GitHub Actions and Probot there are definitely places where like, I sit down now and I'm like, this is probably an action, but I'm just going to go use Probot and like where they are. But if you are a maintainer watching this and you're like, there's so many pull requests, Hacktoberfest, help, how do I manage? Go check out Probot. You might be able to automate some of that stuff away. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, that's a great point. So we kind of open sourced that repo as it launched, and then it's interesting because I feel like a lot of kind of things you have in open source, they tend to be like libraries or maybe frameworks, whereas this is kind of a fully like deployed app, and there's not that many of them. I think Sentry is another good example of an open source project that is kind of like an actual like in production app that's kind of maintained fully in open source, whereas otherwise maybe don't see that quite as often. And one of the main consequences, I suppose, being that you get a lot of user feedback as well, like via issues and like just feature requests without necessarily any desire to like implement it. But that, yeah, I think that's like probably a good, very, very good source for what people want to see in this app that you've built.
So
and
I'm
then
very
occasionally,
distracted by Pandelis is like straight up just posting GraphQL queries in the Twitch chat.
Oh no way! I didn't even see that.
Anyway, so
wait, is it because I was banned? Maybe.
Well, so you got timed out, but then Pandelis tried to share GraphQL. Okay. He tried to share some GraphQL for your first pull request on GitHub. But it was nice. A gift, so Nightbot banned him as well. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So that piece of, if you're looking in the chat, that piece of GraphQL, if you go and paste that into the GitHub GraphQL Explorer, which you can find in their docs, it will show your first pull request. Thank you, Pan. We can now just run that with all of our guests.
The powers of GraphQL. That's awesome. What was I saying? Yeah, I think, but yeah, that was a repo, the Slack integration, where definitely they were kind of folks submitting pull requests, and I honestly still feel bad about like not getting back to as many people as I wanted to, which I don't know how common this is. Yeah, again, I wouldn't say I have like that much open source maintenance experience, but when you're kind of running a project like that within a company, and then your team's kind of remit or area of ownership is not necessarily confined to that one project, that means you have a lot of like different priorities, and that might be like, part of them might be the open source project, part of them might be, all right, everyone, we need to ship sort of these 3 features for this integration over the quarter, and then the rest of our time needs to be other stuff. And that means you kind of really focus on shipping those 3 things, and maybe not as focused on responding to like pull requests or issues or anything like that. Although it does always feel bad, and especially because if you launch something like this with like a with the kind of a statement like, oh yeah, we're open source and we're really going to embrace that, and then you don't really follow through on that promise 100% like all the time, it just feels a little bit bad.
So yeah, the reason I wanted to go into that story, which I guess to bookend these 2 experiences here and relate that to some advice for Hacktoberfest contributors watching, is like when you were a contributor, you dove in and wrote this code for this thing you were using, and you didn't necessarily run all the tests that they would have had you done. And then as a maintainer, you've got the other side of that, where it's like, I would love to respond and give these people my time, but I have other things going on, and this project isn't my whole life. Which I guess to kind of like round that out to people who are finding new pull requests to make right now, what advice would you give them for bridging that gap, like for making sure that they help the maintainer like help you essentially?
Yes. Right. Yeah, I think there's definitely like a lot of things that are actually in your control with this. So definitely don't do what I did and just try and edit it like on GitHub and don't run it locally. I feel like or actually, let me start this way. So I think the most straightforward thing that you can probably do is just have like a very good description of what your change actually does. That kind of, it doesn't just communicate what's already in the code. And even if it's a small change, you might think, oh, it'll be obvious to like everyone, what's going on here. But the description of a pull request isn't just to communicate or to summarize what your code does, but it's to signal understanding of what the impacts of your changes will be and what other options you've considered, and kind of like maybe showing your appreciation for like some of the complexities or some of the trade-offs that were involved in making this change. And that might sound ridiculous when it's a small change, but I do think it's very important as a maintainer to have that like confirmation that, oh yeah, this person isn't just someone trying to score some points in some competition by submitting something that is kind of not very well thought through. But this person has really thought about it, and I feel like they know what they're doing, and that's going to make reviewing this even easier. So very clear, good kind of PR descriptions. And I'm sure there's many like blog posts on like how to write like good pull requests in open source projects. Probably check those out.
I'm sure there has to be something on the open source guides, right?
Yes, definitely. And I feel like this kind of stuff is also such a good investment in your own skills. And I know like from going through this like during university, it feels like the value of technical skills is kind of, it seems like greater than like some of these things like writing clearly. But I think the further you go in your career, the clearer it becomes that these interpersonal skills just matter so much more than the technical skills. And clearly communicating, especially clearly communicating in a written format, is just going to become increasingly important as we work more remotely, as we work more asynchronously.
For sure.
So really spending the time, and honestly, and we both did this at GitHub a lot, and GitHub has a great culture around great written communication, but there would be issue threads where a single comment would be, someone writing it for like half a day, thinking through different things, really being thoughtful, and then kind of delivering this like beautiful 750 words response that is kind of very empathetic and thoughtful and addresses multiple things. And I think that's like a real skill. And Hacktoberfest is a great way to practice that with people you don't know.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the bits that you mentioned are really interesting, like in terms of adding that context as well, like, yes, they've got the code. Yes, they can see what it does. Yes, they can read it. Yes, they can deploy it. But like, that's all stuff that requires them to be in a particular place in a particular time with availability to do that. And so any more text you add that can help them get a gist of what's happening, like from their phone, right, is gonna be helpful in moving that along quickly.
Exactly.
So sorry, Eddie's just joined the chat. Hi, Eddie. Eddie is also guesting. Eddie's guesting multiple times. You'll be able to catch him on a stream soon. I think you're Eddie. Are you tomorrow? I think you're tomorrow, right? Schedule's already gotten away from me. So I shared in the chat there as well this website, opensource.guide, a link to the page How to Contribute, which has a great section 5, which is communicating effectively, which really gets into some of the things that Will is saying here. The top section is give context, which is like literally what we're talking about.
That's it. Yeah. That feels like a great resource.
I think that is all a really great point, and especially to anyone who's watching here who is gearing up for their first pull request, or who made their first pull request, and there's maybe a lot of the questions we had submitted. We've had a couple of questions submitted to the help desk that are like, "Help, my pull request has already been marked as invalid," like they've already been marked as spam. And one of the big things that's going to help with that, if that's something that's happening to you or something you're worried about happening to you, is making sure that you communicate in a way that makes the maintainer feel like you've understood the project and they're taking it seriously. And like, if you can, and again, they're going to be very busy, especially this month, but if you can, participating in some of those community spaces like IRCs, like Discords, like Slacks, and like issues before you jump in and make a pull request, is also going to do a lot to help those maintainers sort through the mess.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So we had another question from Shock Trooper, who asked, "What is both of your favorite languages?" Mine, I don't know if I can claim to have a favorite at this point. I'm a fake developer. Don't listen to anything I say. Wilhelm, how about you?
That's not true at all. I think this is a fantastic question. And I think actually we can extend it with another question, Joe, that maybe you could think about while I'm answering, which is, what would our favorite programming language look like? If we had kind of infinite time and resources? What are the features of like our favorite programming language? I think that would also be quite fun to answer.
God.
But for me, I think there's definitely different kind of programming languages where I really like parts of it. I would say overall, for me, Python comes out ahead in terms of kind of my like personal preferences. It's also just the language I use the most at the moment, but I think there's some really nice things about it. Like, I think the syntax is really clean. I'm a fan of the white space. The white space, contrary to popular belief, is a feature and not a bug. It means that your code indentation cannot lie to you. If you want to learn more about that stuff, check out Raymond Hettinger, who is a Python core developer, who gives great talks about this stuff and how to write like clean, beautiful Python code. I can try and dig up that resource, hoping that I won't get banned again.
Drop it to me in the StreamYard chat, and I'll put it in there.
Okay. Sounds good. What else is nice about Python? So I think like there's some really nice like meta-programming abilities and like being able to like kind of inspect your code. I think the ecosystem around it is obviously fantastic. And I don't necessarily just mean in like a data science context. Like, I actually haven't used Python that much in like a data science context. So this is like, all the fancy machine learning stuff. Although that's definitely also a perk of the language that kind of a lot of the community has centered around using Python for that sort of thing.
Right.
I think, it has great... It has some really nice things around keeping around the state of, this is like a very specific thing, but one of the problems that I've always had with, for example, with JavaScript is that it's a very optimized language. So when you have like a production error, you'll get very little information about like what happened or what was going on in the code base, like when that production error happened. So it might tell you like, so is not a defined function. which is like that's maybe like a useful starting point. But the equivalent in like Python, especially when you use like one of these third-party services that help you, do like error monitoring, like in production, like Sentry.
Right.
In the Python version, you'll see like all of the local variables that were defined and like very extensive stack traces, and it just makes
like a full
much
GDP output kind of situation.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like it gives you just so much of the context, and often it's like that very context that you need to know like why this particular bug happened in this perspective. Like usually when you see, oh yeah, okay, like if the local variables kind of have these values, then this bug, is going to happen. So that's how we can work around it. Whereas in other languages, that can be a bit more difficult.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a couple other nice things about Python as well, but that's like a good starting point, I think.
Cool. No, awesome. So yeah, I guess in answer to your question, so I made the joke about not being a real developer, but what I mean by that is like I only code when there is a problem I can't solve another way. So like my job isn't necessarily, I'm not a software engineer. I do community things. I do developer marketing things. I do DevRel things. And so like I often have to write code, but it's because there isn't an existing app or an existing service I can use. So for me, when I code, I want to be done with it as quick as possible. I want the solution, I want the problem solved, and I want it out of my way, which is in stark contrast to what I believe makes a good programming language, because I'm a big Haskell fan. And what I believe is good about Haskell is it has a ludicrous type system that stops me making mistakes. It's very safety conscious. It's almost to your point about the Python errors. There are some things happening in functional error land that if any of you use Rust, it gives you like really the type system helps you get really detailed and like very pinpointed feedback. But when I write code nowadays, it's always in JavaScript, because JavaScript doesn't get in my way and will let me do the terrible hacky thing I want to do, and it will do something. And it might not be as elegant as it would be if I had the time to do it with Haskell, but it is that kind of thing. So I guess what I would want is like, in my ideal language, is something that falls between those two things without getting in my way, like something that helps me like hack together things very quickly from like a lot of big. I think this is why I'm a big fan of visual languages at the moment, and visual toolkits like NAN, because like most of the time I'm doing CRUD stuff, right, between multiple apps. I'm just munging an API with another API. So I just want like, give me a really easy to use and obvious HTTP request for library and a way to parse JSON elegantly, and let me slam those things together and get out of my way, right? And I don't know what that looks like as a programming language, but it feels like there's a toolkit there. Let me post this link you sent. There's that link that awesome. Will mentioned. Well, what would your ideal programming language look like?
Yeah, no, I think you actually bring up a great point around like how in theory, these programming language, there's different tools for like different purposes, and kind of depends on whether you're trying to build a CRUD thing that, brings together different APIs, or if you're trying to build like a web service, or if you're trying to build some like embedded systems thing, or like there's many different tools. Although I do find like that, relying on the kind of stuff we know already, like is often a very big like crutch in like just building anything, right?
Which is why I end up doing JavaScript, even though I hate it.
Exactly. So, yeah, and obviously all these languages don't like exist in silos, right? Like, I think saying you want Python on the web, that's like a good that's a nice wish for like a programming language, but it's going to be hard to like. It's going to be just more difficult just because of where like JavaScript is right now. And maybe like WebAssembly can help with some of that stuff in the future, but it's kind of more difficult. And then there was another point I was going to make there. Oh yeah, I think like an example of this, what I just said around, you just lean on what you know, is like a lot of the tooling internally at GitHub is like built in Ruby, because the main GitHub code base is like built in Ruby on Rails. So even though maybe there would be some better kind of languages to use for like a build script, or like a random tool that helps you like set up your laptop to have all of the necessary dependencies, like there might be a better tool for that, but because Ruby is like the language that everyone speaks very well and can work in, and that everyone kind of knows, that's why the tools are written in that. So I think definitely there's also limits to like picking the right tool for the right job.
Yeah.
But anyway, to stop beating around the bush, favorite. So I think my dream programming language would definitely be like quite Python inspired. So like I think there should be like whitespace.
Right,
I think there's some things in the Python. Yeah, definitely keep coming back to whitespace as this recurring theme. I think you can See that? I like that. I think some things in the standard library in Python could be better. So the way Ruby does some things around like integers and date times is like really, really pretty. So for example, if you wanted to have a loop in Python that runs 5 times, you would do like for I in range 10. Yes. Whereas in Ruby, you could do 10 dot times and then like the standard Ruby block format, which I feel like that's kind of even more beautiful. And it's still like really quite explicit and like tells you really what it does.
Yeah.
Or you could, I forget what exactly the syntax is like for Ruby date times, but you can do things like 10.minutes.ago. And that gives you like...
that's awesome. What? Okay.
Yeah, right? It's like crazy. Yeah. So I want that kind of stuff. I think that would be awesome. Yeah.
Language mechanism wise, like, is that how is that implemented?
I think the 10. I actually, don't quote me on this, but I think everything in Ruby is like a class, right? So I think the 10 integer class is just overloaded with a ton of stuff that ends up handling like all of this. Okay. Although I'm gonna try and see if this is actually true.
I don't know anything about it. I worked at GitHub for 2.5 years. Didn't touch a single line of Ruby.
Nice.
Yep.
Maybe I'm forgetting how this works.
I don't know. If that's how it works, sounds awesome. Also, while you're doing that, I just want to point out, we get this question every time we stream. We've streamed 3 times now, and every time been asked our favorite programming language. One thing I think that we've kind of touched on and beaten around a bit is that, like, ultimately it doesn't really matter. You end up using a choice of language. You end up choosing a language because the application at the time demands it. And so, like, what we've kind of been talking about and the situations in which we end up with different selections, we're not trying to encourage any programming language culture wars here.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely not. Although it's fun to think about this stuff.
It is fun to think about.
Yeah. I think... Yeah, I have like a long wish list of things. Like, I think Go's like speed and runtime is like kind of the benchmark nowadays in terms of like just stuff being really fast. There's like a performance overhead to Ruby and Python. So I wish something like Python existed with all its lovely features and with Go's speed and like runtime. Actually, I've also kind of jumped on top of the types train recently.
You moved into TypeScript?
Not actually TypeScript so much, just because I don't have like that big a JavaScript code base at the moment. But
why is like simple Pole written then?
So it's all written in it's a big Django app. So lots of Python. And as of recently, like lots of types with MyPy. I was actually surprised how actually there's still some like problems with it, or kind of some clearly visible like future improvements. But it's actually quite advanced. Like it's quite nice, and you can catch a bunch of bugs by just adding types to like your code base. And yeah, I'm a fan of types now, when I didn't used to be.
Great. Matt said Ruby doesn't get enough love from people. Rails.dev, written in Ruby. It's a Rails app. We are spreading the love into 2020. Brand new app, week old, Ruby on Rails. I don't have a clue what's happening in it. I leave that to Simon and John and Chris. I mentioned Simple Pole, which I think is a great transition to talk about something else. So we've already spoken about, used to work at GitHub, and then you moved to being kind of strong independent businessman. I want to hear a little bit about this. I think it's like your story is a really interesting one to me, because you had this side project for as long as I've known you. You've always been working on Simple Pole, and you've grown this thing now into a business with multiple products, and you have staff as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. So one part-time employee, one full-time, and then one very occasional, very part-time.
Right.
But yeah, so
tell us how this happens. Like, where does Simple Pole come from, and how
for sure
get to this point?
So it started actually, and I hinted at this earlier, but it started actually very much in the context of like organizing hackathons and like the kind of local like university tech scene. So at some point, at some point in 2015, I started using Slack, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is the future of how teams communicate. if I could work there now as an employee, like I would, do that immediately. But I still have to do university and all of that, so that didn't quite work out back then. But I thought, hey, maybe the next closest thing I could probably do is like build something around it. So I actually kind of partially was motivated originally by wanting to work at Slack, which now, like, that's not really the motivation anymore necessarily. But the specific problem we were having while like organizing a hackathon, and I think this was the Hack London 2, which you also attended, and it was I think it was Josh who was trying to set
physical
up
events. Those were good, weren't they?
Right. And it was I think it was Josh who was trying to set up a poll in Slack on which item of swag we wanted to get everyone.
Right.
And I think he had like 15 or something different options of all the different things we could do. Like we could do T-shirts, or we could do like mugs, or we could do blankets or beanies, or like all these different things. And then he picked like a animal emoji for each of the different items we could get, with the idea being that you could react to that Slack message with like an animal emoji, and then the one which has the most votes like wins, and we'd settle with that. I didn't actually remember like how well this went, but I just remember that it kind of took him a really long time to set up that poll.
Right.
And then I think I found myself at another hackathon, like actually attending this time. I think actually I had a first attempt with this for this app at Hack Knots, which is also kind of a full circle thing.
Right.
But I kind of figured out, actually this doesn't work too well. But then I did a second attempt at like an event a couple of months later, and then I realized, you could do something with this. So the very first version of Simple Poll essentially lets you type in a sort of terminal-like command into Slack, and then creates a poll without much manual work required from you, and kind of sets up all of the emoji reactions so that's very simple for everyone to work to vote on kind of the option that they prefer. So that was the very first edition of Simple Poll, and that launched in, I think actually I finished it in like December 2015, and then it launched. I tweeted about it in January 2016. So this was quite some time ago.
Obviously now the Slack API is very full feature, lots of ways you're using lots of those features. Like back then, what did that look like? Was that all like, it was just detecting chat commands, sending a webhook? Like what was the API like at that time?
Yeah, so back then the API, you're right. It's changed like quite a lot, or it's kind of got a lot more features. The so all that it would do back then is post a message. So so Slack would send out like an HTTP request to like my web app, to the Simple Poll web app, and then Simple Poll would respond with like a message of the poll itself, passed out of the command that you sent to the app, and then it would call the API a bunch of times to like initialize like the emoji reactions basically with the vote of the person that installed the app. And this was incredibly confusing for a lot of people who didn't really understand how our emoji reactions worked in Slack, because it meant that you, as the person who installed the app, like you couldn't really vote on any of the options, because it would use your votes to kind of provide the base interface to create the.
I see.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, because you have to add all the emoji. Right. Yes.
Yeah. So it would auto react for you for all of the options, so that all of your colleagues had something to click on, didn't have to find the like thing manually in the reaction picker. Unfortunately, that implementation, though it was the best thing to do at the time, resulted in regular support tickets of the nature of like, hey, I just installed the app and then I voted on all the options and then they all disappeared. Because obviously if you click on it, it goes away. It removes it removes it. But then summer of 2016, Slack decided to add buttons to the API, and that kind of made it a lot more user-friendly and kind of intuitive to use.
Right. Okay. Amazing. Cool. Thank you for that tangent. So
that's the beginning of the story.
Yeah. And you launched this thing, you put it out into the wild, and like, I guess at the time it was just a free app.
Yeah, exactly. It was completely free. And I tweeted about it when it launched, and then I think someone from Product Hunt kind of saw that it launched and posted on Product Hunt, and then it got like a couple of first users installing it from there, which was super exciting. And I think actually the one other thing that's really worth mentioning here is, this was my first year in university, and we had a really great technology society within the university, who were kind of always organizing events, always doing really cool stuff, like bringing in speakers, organizing like interview like workshops where you could learn how to pass like coding interviews, that sort of stuff, and just a really great community of people like doing all of this stuff. And I think honestly, like being part of that community in some way really helped me feel comfortable in like building this and playing around with it, and also made me want to like show it off to them, right? So like, I think it can be hard to build things like in solitude, and when you have like a group of friends where you can be like, hey, I built this, like, what do you think? That's super motivational, and it's just like, I want to always have that environment, and I want everyone to always have some kind of environment like that.
I have kind of a recent story of that, which is just like, it's nowhere near that because I didn't actually build the thing, but just like, I was like 5 steps removed from a thing that came out, and it made me feel so happy. It's like I had written some documentation for a piece of game technology that was being used by some people who launched a game, and that game came out, and I was like,
nice,
I'm somewhere in that pipeline and I'm playing this game and I feel like I feel very important. It was just, it was good to be like, hey, I had something to do with that. And it's like, I'm so far removed. But yeah, when you, especially when like you're organizing a hackathon in the Slack and you're like, hey, that thing you were just doing, here is a simple way to do that I made. Do the thing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool. Like you can see, it's just so much more fun to build things with other people. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, at what point did it start to become a thing, right? Like more than just like a project and more into a product, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think probably one of the main things that turned it into that was that just more and more people kind of started and then kept using it sort of every day.
Right.
So Slack had this, or still Slack has this great Slack app directory where like all of the different apps that you can have within Slack are listed. And within submitting it there, Slack kind of just kept driving traffic to the app so that people would install it like every single day. I still remember sitting in like a lecture and I got a notification that it was like approved, and I remember feeling very excited about that. But I didn't realize that this is what was going to drive like so much of the growth and so much of the usage. Which I think this goes into a little bit of more like the kind of indie hacker, like building your own company territory, as opposed to necessarily like open source like advice or whatever. But I feel like a lot of people really overestimate the importance of like an initial launch and think that all of the excitement and hype and like potentially the press is going to bring them their whole user base. Whereas really like having a consistent, like strong, qualified like distribution channel, like that's really where it's at. Like I think that's really like the main way that you can get users for your app, and that can be like SEO, or that can be like a specific like store, like the Slack app directory. But yeah, I feel like that's something that's very easy to miss, like prioritizing the launch over like a stable distribution channel.
Right.
So it kind of kept growing. Yeah.
Sorry, we definitely have had, Raise.dev launched this week, and we had that discussion about like how we wanted to launch and with what amount of splash we wanted to launch and what way we wanted to grow our user base. And like we had a very similar discussion to that, where it's like, hey, we can do the big press route and the product hunt route this week, but I think right now what we really want to do is like hear from people what they think of this thing. And so like that's not actually where we want our user base to come from. We want it to come from like people that we know will value this.
Yeah. That's actually also, I think, a very good point. Like that, not all users are like created equal, right? Like some are the people that you want using your thing, and some are the ones that you can add the most value like to whatever kind of they're maybe paying for or using. And some are just maybe not that interested in it. I think Product Hunt obviously is a very general audience. Probably the single biggest group of people in there are people who are keen on using new products, which is like, I don't know, that's like also still a very broad audience.
Right.
But it can be confusing because especially like as you read these like articles about, so-and-so was acquired for this many millions of dollars and they had this many millions of users, it's kind of all very much reduced to like numbers. And I think, from like an engineering perspective, it can be very appealing to think of a lot of things in terms of like, here's how many users I got today. Whereas really probably what you care about more is like how many of those users like come back to your product like every week because they get a little value out of it, or where are the places where the people your product can help the most are like hanging out, and how can you engage with them meaningfully and build something that's actually really valuable for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, that's a bit of an indie hacker tangent, I think.
I hope it's useful. for the folks in the
Yeah.
audience. We haven't. I mean, usually people are ask questions when they're bored, and the chat's been listening. So we've got some Simple Fold fans. We've got someone dropped in, so they use it every day.
Aw, that's awesome. How many million viewers are we on, Joe?
17. Oh, 19.
Million,
19.
nice.
Sorry, 19. Yeah, 19 million. Thank you, everyone, for being here. If you do have questions, we can answer them. Feel free to drop them in the chat. So yeah, anyway, sorry, continue.
But yeah, to answer your question of like when it became a real thing, I think that was the starting point. So people were kind of, or more people were using kind of every week. It definitely was initially like, I wasn't quite sure like what exactly it would be. I know that I really enjoyed working on it. But it didn't really necessarily change my life plans like too much at that point. Like I was still doing an internship that summer at sort of a small London company, which was actually, I mean, I think they had like 300 employees. Maybe they weren't like that small.
Small London company.
In comparison, actually, I mean, even compared to like GitHub, I guess, I don't know why I was thinking that they're small. That's a weird perspective I had there.
What did they do?
So it's a company called One Fine Stay. The way I described it back then was like luxury Airbnbs. So you could like rent a apartment for like a week or something, but it would start at like 200 like pounds a night, or like I think it's like $300 a night for anyone who that helps. That conversion helps. But it would go easily to like $1,000 a night or something like that. So kind of very expensive, very much focused on like the sort of luxury segment, I suppose. But they had like a tech platform that was also like built in Django, so that was kind of a nice place to like learn more. I think I learned about React there, which was really cool. Really nice team. But yeah, at that point it was very much like Simple Poll is a side project. It can't really ever have like more advanced features. A lot of people were telling me I could never charge for it in any way, because what would you even charge for? And I think that's probably an example of like you having to be careful about like the local community that you're with, because it's very easy for someone who's never like charged for a digital product to say that it's impossible to charge for it. Whereas really like there probably is something there. But yeah, I kind of just kept working on it, kept building it, kept making it a little bit better. And at the same time, it would kind of continue to serve use cases that people had. And it kind of just grew a little bit more like every week, every month. And then, as I mentioned, Slack added buttons. So I kind of made that like a better feature, kind of continually added some of the new like capabilities that Slack would like introduce to their API, like within Simple Poll, to kind of support all the different things they offered. And I think there's surprisingly many around those. So there's always more work to do. And then let's see. So and then in 2017, I interned with you and with John at GitHub, which is also why I'm here right now, probably.
Bringing the gang back together.
Exactly. So that was obviously a lot of fun. So that was kind of developer relations internship around like campus experts and field. I don't know if you want to say anything around campus experts for like background, or whether it's worth going into that.
Will, John, and I worked on the GitHub education team. So we were working on helping students who are learning to use GitHub and learning software engineering. So we had a program called Campus Experts, which was if you were like a student and you wanted to help teach people on your campus, we would give you resources to do that. And then there was a group within that group who had kind of like taken leadership of other campus experts in their region. So they were students helping other students help other students. There's like pile of students helping students. And so that was what we set Will on for the summer. Like, how do we help those people do that thing? And that's where field experts comes in. Yeah.
That was awesome. Yeah, such a great time, like that internship. I still remember, like, it was obviously wonderful. I think GitHub is very good at treating its interns incredibly well. From all kinds of perspective, including lots of food, which meant I gained a lot of weight in that summer.
The joys of living in America.
Exactly. But actually, the one thing I remember thinking as well, like, which might be relevant to kind of the audience watching right now, like during the European hours, I feel like throughout, like, growing up with sort of the tech world, it always seemed like a lot of the really exciting stuff was happening sort of in like San Francisco or like the Bay Area. And actually going there was kind of always like a dream, and then obviously that dream like coming true in some ways. And I remember making like a note about it, like as I was kind of there and then maybe heading back, where it said something along the lines of like, you know, being here is cool, and the network effect from the people is really strong. So just the fact that there's so many people there and that they all know each other and that they can all help each other is like really powerful. But actually, like, it's not like, you know, everyone I met was sort of like a 20x engineer who was, you know, had some enlightened insight about the world. Like, they were sort of, you know, same people as us, building stuff on the internet. And it kind of suddenly a lot of the things that before maybe seemed like they could only be done by the geniuses over in some other country now seemed like much more within reach.
For sure.
And maybe me saying this on a live stream isn't going to be, you know, that convincing, but I definitely had that experience of like, oh yeah, no wait, this just people.
I remember at GitHub Universe in particular, so GitHub's annual conference, we used to bring a lot of students over for it, and there was like a year where we had like 20 students from all over the world. And I remember all their reactions after like 3 days of being in San Francisco, and like their whole computer science career hearing this. It's fair to call it a myth, I think, like the myth of Silicon Valley, and their reactions to actually being there. And I was just like, this must be like a really disillusioning experience for people.
Yeah.
But also, as you say, it's empowering when you realize that actually, like, it's not, you have those capabilities wherever you want to be. It's not like you don't have to be there to make it in the way you want to make it. Which I guess brings us like during that summer you interned at GitHub, you're still working on Simple Poll, and you didn't stay in the Valley to launch Simple Poll as a product. It's being built in London, so
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was a super fun summer. Did a lot of interesting things, and then as part of that, I started also working on the GitHub Slack integration. That kind of came up as a project during that time, and that ended up then being kind of my job until several months later. And I think then probably and then I joined GitHub full time in kind of April 2018. And then the next big milestone probably worth mentioning is June 2018, in which there was a very big event. Do you remember what the big event was?
June 2018?
Yeah.
What was happening in June 2018?
Wait,
yes, I do. I do remember that. Was it the acquisition?
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Yeah, so I was actually on my way over to the headquarters. When I got a message from my friend Charles sending me this like Business Insider article being like, oh yeah, GitHub got acquired by Microsoft. Congrats. Yeah. And then there were like rumors about this the week before, and actually there had always been rumors about this. Like
when you work at any tech company, there's rumors all the time, right? Like you're always IPOing and you're always being acquired every other week.
Yeah, exactly. And I just kind of dismissed it. I didn't think much of it. And I was heading over there for like a actually kind of a mini summit around like OctoKits and Probot and stuff. So mini summit was like GitHub parlance for like a company offsite, because most of GitHub is remote. Kind of bringing folks together every once in a while is like really helpful for bonding as a team, for planning, that sort of stuff. So it was kind of a very lucky coincidence. Got in on like Saturday or Sunday, and then the next morning, and then there was like all these rumors like, oh, the office is closed today. That's so secret. There's people going in and out. What's happening? It was this big mystery. And then the next morning, like, you know, Satya Nadella was there, like giving interviews and talking about like Minecraft and stuff.
And there were balloons, and it was all very strange. Yeah, I do. Now you mention it, I do really remember that day, because I was actually in San Francisco at the time, and I remember I woke up really late for some reason. I just rolled over to just like 1,000,001 notifications. It's like, oh, everyone's sending me this Bloomberg article. Apparently, we've been bought.
Oh yeah, it was Bloomberg. That's right.
Yeah, it was Bloomberg. Yeah, and that was like how we found out. It was very fun. But yeah,
exactly.
So okay, that was a big event. Okay, so how's that? So you came to this event via the Simple Poll story. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, exactly. Good pick up. Actually, I'm just trying to find a selfie I took with Satya.
just taking a detour for a casual flex.
It was so it wasn't actually. He didn't agree to be part of it. I took it from another floor.
Oh, I mean, yeah.
So it doesn't really
through that hole. Okay, so
It's
the
not.
GitHub
Yeah, yeah.
Office used to be I think I've got this right. John's in the audience, so he can correct me if I've got this wrong. It used to be a train depot. And so there was for some reason, there was this big hatch in between the first and second floor. There was a rail that went through the ground building that was remained from when it used to be a train depot. And there was a big hole in the floor where locomotives would be lowered down from somewhere. I'm not entirely clear how this setup was meant to have worked, but
I
it
didn't
was
know
it was
this.
left there as a
This is
window. Yeah, that's
fascinating.
what it was, or what I was told it was. Some of them might have been having me on, but yeah. So they kept it there and put glass around it and had it as this window from the second floor to the first floor.
No way. That's so. I just sent you the picture on Twitter. I'll leave it to you whether you feel like it's worth sharing on. Is it possible to share this on the stream? I didn't even know.
Yes, that's worth. Yeah, I can definitely upload that. That's worth it. So yeah, continue your story while I upload this into the stream.
Yes, so I'll continue the story, and then we'll do this maybe more interesting than my unconsented selfie with Satya while he's giving an interview. But yeah, so I think just this acquisition kind of changed things a little bit in my book. I was working at this, small little company that was building some really cool stuff. At that point, probably quite a big company. And then just kind of Giant kind of swoops in and buys the company. And in many ways, that's kind of definitely for the better for the product. But it had kind of a few. There we go. This is me. I don't know why I'm making that face.
This is the selfie you chose to send me to show on a stream. You made this decision.
But down there, you can see Satya giving an interview. So that is me and the CEO of Microsoft in a shot. But yeah, I feel like the acquisition kind of changed a few things. So some of my friends who I was working with, they were suddenly kind of very wealthy overnight, which felt like it kind of changed a few dynamics. But the one main kind of good effect that it had on me was that it really told myself, all right, I feel like I have this simple poll thing in my pocket. It's kind of just been growing. I haven't really done many things with it. It's a kind of a nice thing to bring up in casual conversation with other nerds that I'm running this thing, which has several 100,000 monthly active users. But I felt like at that point, I was like, all right, I need to kind of do something with this. So I decided more seriously to pursue adding a paid plan to it. And kind of maturing it in some ways, adding a proper terms of service and figuring out what a paid plan could look like, actually investing some more time in it. And then that ended up being, ended up launching in November 2018. So I switched on a paid plan with more features as well as some restrictions for people on the free tier. And it was kind of designed in a way so that only the top users would have to pay.
Right.
And all the users were companies, so kind of the $50 a month I was charging for was really a very tiny expense for something that some of them were kind of using every day.
Right.
And then that ended up going quite well, yeah.
You might be about to explain this, but I'll just jump in anyway, just in case. So we spoke earlier about people couldn't imagine how you could monetize this. So how did you do that in the end? What were the restrictions and what was the thing people actually paying for?
Yeah, no, great question. So there's a few. So I think the main thing is that whereas in the past you could kind of use the tool completely for free with as much usage as you'd want. With the introduction of the paid plan, you could only create 100 votes in a month across your whole workspace,
which is still a lot.
Which is exactly, yeah. So 95+% of people never hit that limit ever. And then the few that did, they kind of exceeded it by a wide margin. So they were really power using it. So it felt like that was kind of a nice place where I could put that and kind of ask those users who really rely on it to pay. And those who maybe use it casually, they could continue using it for free. So that was kind of the kind of restriction on the one hand. And then the paid plan also gained a few extra abilities. So there's this, most polls that you can create, anyone can vote on as many options as they'd like within the poll itself. So if you're asking people what meeting can you make, or what meeting time works for you, anyone can vote on a whole week. Exactly, yeah. You can cast as many votes as you'd like. But if you have a poll where maybe you want everyone to vote on only a single option, as in what's your favorite design out of all of these 4, and you can only have one vote, and maybe even want it to be anonymous, then that's a paid feature. And I think there was a couple other things like that. So yeah, and then it turns out people were happy to pay for that.
Awesome
stuff.
That's what you want to hear. That launched a lot later than I before for some reason. I guess I thought it was much. I thought it was like the year before for some reason. Okay, fascinating. Yeah. So that
was November 2018. Yeah.
Cool. So you went from like launching a paid plan to being able to do that independently, actually really quick, because you left GitHub, you said September 2019?
September 2019. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
no, it's true. I feel like the advantage I had was like that it was already a product that was used by like a lot of people. And there was sort of some trust built up with the user base that this is a reliable thing that can add value. And then lots of companies who were kind of using it to do all kinds of things, they were happy to kind of pay that very small price. And then it kind of grew very gradually over time. Like every month there would kind of be more revenue. And then it kind of got to the point where I ended up having a very full-time job week, like during the week, working on GitHub stuff. And on the weekends, I would just deal with like all kinds of support, finance, like legal questions. Like there can be like a surprising amount of like bureaucracy around all of this stuff, like VAT and like SCA, like all of this regulatory stuff that kind of means you as like this indie developer have to do more work and spend more time.
Especially since like you were an indie developer in the UK, and I imagine because it was on the Slack marketplace that you were getting customers from like all over the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So, and that didn't seem like too fun at the time. Like, I kind of really enjoyed like building stuff and like building new stuff. So, spending basically all of my time not building new stuff, but kind of building stuff that in some sense other people are kind of telling me to build during the week, although GitHub is very good at kind of letting engineers like have product opinions and build things that they think are like relevant. There was a kind of a sense, obviously, you can't just work on absolutely anything you want like during the week. And then on the weekend, I was doing all of this sort of legal finance stuff. And really, I just kind of wanted more time to build like random side projects, which ended up contributing to that decision to like leave GitHub to work on Simple Paul and side projects full time, which happened a few months later in September 2019. And it's been a year now. Can't really believe it.
Congrats. Very exciting. 1 second, sorry. So you mentioned that your original intention was to build side projects, and that like we said that some of those may have become Simple Paul products. Was that like what? So you've launched 3 things since you went solo. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's probably right. It kind of depends how you count it, I guess. But yeah, it's very hard to keep track.
Sure.
But yeah, it's actually really interesting. Like I feel like I've learned quite a lot over the past like year.
Right.
One thing that I learned pretty quickly is that I thought, if I just leave my full-time job, I'd now have kind of infinite time to like build all of the things I want to build like at the same time. But it turns out that, if you leave an 8-hour a day job, like then you kind of gain around 8 hours a day to like build new things. And that's still a bit finite.
Yeah.
So in an ideal world, I would have maybe not built like three new things, or we at this point wouldn't have built like 3 new things over like the past year, but we would have built like 100 things. So kind of learning to prioritize and like learning how to do this stuff has been very interesting experience like over the past year. And I think also like one weird thing, and I'd be curious actually to hear your perspective on this or how you deal with this, but I feel like it's a very kind of common line of thinking that there's a lot of these like sort of systems within like society or within like a job that kind of constrain you in a lot of ways. I promise it's not that deep. Like I'm not about to write up my manifesto here. But no, I feel like there's a lot of like systems that end up really constraining you, right? So you have a manager that you check in with like every day. You have like working hours that you adhere to like every day. You have like a performance review cycle. You have like quarterly goals, like all of that stuff, all of those systems. And they kind of constrain you in terms of like what you can work on. And if only there was like a freer world where we could do all, whatever we wanted to, like that would be so good. And I remember like going through this like within like a few weeks of leaving the job, and I kind of spent a day or two like just in bed watching YouTube videos. I just remember thinking I remember feeling so bad and like unfulfilled after that. Because like it just didn't feel like I was doing anything valuable or useful
Yeah.
or in any way kind of mentally stimulating, I guess.
Yeah.
And then pretty quickly, and then over the past year, I realized actually like I miss having some of these structures of having a manager, even though there's like constraints and problems with that. But in many ways, constraints can be very useful, and like having goals that you want to work towards, having like a priority list, having a clear idea of what you're not going to do in a certain week, even though in an ideal world you could. And kind of trying to build up like my own system, like as a strong independent businessman, as you say, like it feels like there's not that much out there in terms of like how you can do that. I don't know. Maybe this is getting very like off topic here, but I'm curious.
No, I think it's relevant, especially because like I think there is a very clear tie this back to Hacktoberfest, where like we are talking about a side activity that people are going to go out and contribute to open source for an incentive, which is a t-shirt, right? Like there is, and that's why I think this is relevant, is because like essentially what you're talking about in that shift from being in a company to like being your own boss is accountability mechanisms, right? Like when you're at a company and you've got managers, you've got performance reviews, like I want to say your goals are clear. That's not always the case working in a company, but like you have someone who can say, yes, you are doing what I expect you to be doing, keep doing that or change course. And like when you're independent, like I, as you know, because we have the same accountant, I was like freelance for a long time. And so I definitely have the same struggle where, especially for me, I'm someone who's very, I need fear to be motivated to complete my work. I need an impending deadline that's life or death, right? So this Hacktoberfest live stream, super great, really easy to do, because if I don't get it done, I'm gonna look silly in front of all you wonderful viewers. So going independent and losing a manager was like, I had the same thing as you, where like there are days when I'm like, oh, I just kind of wasted this whole day, and that's not ideal. So yeah, I think one of like, I guess like one of the ways I have dealt with that is one of the things that's weird about going from salary to like your own boss is like there are always bigger plans in a company. Like there's always OKRs and KPIs and numbers you have to hit. And then when you go to like doing your own thing, you are the one who's responsible for those bigger plans. And so one of the things that I found really helpful was thinking of everything as like, what am I actually delivering at the end of like this month or this time period? Which again is actually, now I think about it, a very GitHub thing where it's all about shipping something, right? And I think that's, to bring that back to like what we're talking about with Hacktoberfest, I think we have this is probably a similar reason why Hacktoberfest does get like help people contribute, is because there's a very clearly defined time period and goal that you have to do these things in. Yeah, I went all over the houses to talk about that, but I think that's
so many good points. There are so many good points in there. I feel like what's also really hard is the like level of abstraction, right? So you want the day-to-day accountability, and you also want to have a good answer for like, all right, where do I want to be in like I'm an SIB. So you need to like day-to-day accountability and like giving yourself credit for things you've done, but you also kind of need to think at the time scale of like a week and plan your week out. And you also need to think of the time scale of a month and the quarter. And then also like 10 years, right? Like it's very easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and be like, and you know, keep hitting those deadlines. And I think I very much agree with you there that like deadlines help like motivate me. And I probably am also somewhat in the camp of like being motivated by some sense of fear, although it feels
the possibility of failure, letting people down, I think is how I usually put it. Like if it's just myself really, I'm letting down, it's like I'm never going to do this thing if I'm the only person who cares. If someone else cares, it's like, oh god, now I need to do it. Like,
and is that like I don't know, it feels like I want at least the biggest part of my motivation to be like, you know, courage and like adventuring into this new world. And
you know what, and I don't want to turn this into like our therapy session, but honestly what I think it is well, actually this isn't gonna be true for you, I don't know what the education system in Germany is, but for me I think it's very much the UK education system, because it's all just like you've got a next lot of exams coming up, and these exams, the results will decide your whole life, get going. And so like, I very much think that's where it comes from. I'm always just looking for that next like life or death moment to be around the corner.
Right. No, I think the school system has so much to do with all of this. But yeah, I don't know. I think my main point there was just it's hard to take a step back and like think about the future like consciously and have a framework for thinking about like a time period as long as like a year or 5 years or even 10 years. yeah, so I'm still trying to figure that out. If you've solved this, if you're a viewer and you've solved this problem, please hit me up.
Yeah. Well, I hope this is so one of the reasons why I thought it's really interesting to talk about is because this is kind of like that, to me, like your journey is almost the other end of the open source road, right? Like where you find an area of technology that you're interested in and you get engaged in some projects around that, and along the way part of that kind of grows its own legs and becomes its own project, and then before you know it, right, like you transition from contributor to maintainer to product owner, and it walks off into the wilderness on its own. And so I wanted to talk about this because I hope this is like useful and motivating to people who are thinking about stuff this month and thinking about like, okay, where could my contributions this month take me? Like, why ultimately am I doing this aside from the t-shirt? And so I hope that this has been an inspiring story for others. Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So we are getting towards the end of our time. This Shop Trooper said it's definitely a millennial thing. Yeah, probably. Does anyone have any questions for Will whilst we're hanging out? We've got a little bit more time left that we can squeeze out. If anyone has any questions for Will or about Hacktoberfest generally. We haven't had any new questions in through the help desk, but if anyone does have some questions they want to ask, now's the opportunity to squeeze them in. Otherwise, we will call this edition of the help desk a wrap. Give it a couple of seconds. I think it's all good. So I guess like to give people some time to do that, one thing I wanted to kind of continue that thread. How have you now found that transition from like motivating yourself to now having employees that you now need to be doing that for?
I think it's actually super helpful.
Right.
Like, because it adds a little bit of that pressure of like, oh yes, or the little bit of this fear motivation, right? Like, oh, I'm responsible now for more people. Like, it's actually quite helpful for not just me now, like what the longer term vision looks like what the plan is for the next 3 months. So I would very much credit sort of the first full-time employee, Tom, with kind of helping me get to like a much better understanding of like what the vision for the future looks like and what
Awesome.
like what we're going to build next. And it's actually kind of relevant, I guess, a little bit more to this audience in terms of what our plans for the future are like. So when I kind of initially said like side projects are like, you know, something I wanted to be doing more of, that's not necessarily just kind of around Slack, but like, and you and I have talked about this at length in the past as well. And I think we, in some way, we both kind of agree that like the official or the state of developer tools in like in the current world is still sort of leaves a lot to be desired for kind of improvement. Mm-hmm. I personally think like that like writing and building and shipping software right now is so slow. Like it's so slower than it needs to be. And I think at some point over the past year, I asked myself this question of like, all right, what do I want the next like 10 years of my life to be about? And I roughly came up with this like North Star vision of, okay, I want there to be a world where anyone can kind of, or actually not even anyone, but like I personally can like build and ship some kind of software MVP within 2 weeks. And I have all of the tools, the right like environment, like the available time. Yeah. But I just want to be able to ship one of these side project ideas, and whether that's like a Slack app or like a random like web project, or I've been playing around with this idea for a social network, which I'm sure you'll be excited to hear.
I'm so intrigued. Is it you only communicate through answers on polls?
The idea is more to have it be webhook based.
Oh, okay.
So a webhook based. Actually, I guess that's part of the story. I do also think that we're kind of missing a social network at the moment. I kind of wish Facebook, I kind of want a non-evil version of Facebook as it was in like 2013, where you have like threads and like comments and emoji
literally
reactions.
Everyone is in one place, and now everyone is all over the internet. And yeah. Exactly.
Whereas right now it's kind of, you have like everyone showing off their vacations on Instagram, everyone showing off their fancy thoughts on Twitter. You have some like group chats that maybe are a bit more real. And then you have maybe Twitch. Actually, where does Twitch fit into this? I don't even know. But anyway, like, so a project like that, right, where there's clearly a lot of moving pieces involved, although a lot of it builds on prior art. And really the key new element is like some product idea, right? So like I want Google Plus style circles in my new social network, or whatever that looks like. And right now, the engineering effort for that can be like quite substantial. And I think I want to spend a big portion of my time over the next like 10 years working towards a future where that becomes much, much faster. And I think part of that is by giving folks better tools like during development, helping you get a better understanding of like what your code actually does at runtime, making it much, much easier and much more fun to like to write tests. Like I think writing tests, I don't know if this probably maybe comes up in the context of some open source projects as well, but writing tests is definitely my least fun part of like building a new feature or whatever, just because it's very tedious and it feels like it could be so much better. So yeah, lots of things to kind of improve over in the state of developer tools, and I'm excited to move kind of my company more in the direction of focusing on some of that in addition to our current efforts.
Interesting. Fascinating. Cool. Well, thank you for filling us in on the plans for Simple Poll. We haven't had any more questions, so I guess what we will do is wrap up there. So that leaves me just to say thank you very much, Wilhelm, for joining us and walking us through your story and your insights on open source and going from contributor to maintainer. So I will
thank you so much
say
for having
goodbye.
me.
No worries. Thank you again for being here. So I'll remove you from the stream now whilst I tell everyone what we've got coming up next. Farewell. Bye. Disappearing into the background. Poof. Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for listening to Wilhelm. This isn't our last Hacktoberfest Help Desk stream today. We will be back in 4.5 hours at 10 p.m. Central European time, 9 p.m. UK time, or 4 p.m. Eastern US time with the crew from MLH. We'll have Swift and Jonathan Gottfried, the founders of MLH, who will be here with our founder, John Britton. It's a congregation of founders, a flock of founders. They will all be here talking again about open source and their journeys and answering any questions that we do have that come up. We are also going to be here for the rest of Hacktoberfest. So the schedule is already up on our Twitch for the shows tomorrow. You can find that at the URL down here. That schedule is shows for each week, so it doesn't show the rest of the month yet, but it does show our schedule for Friday. We have some great guests tomorrow. We've got Eddie, who's been hanging out in the chat. Hi, Eddie. Thank you, Eddie. Eddie will be on the show tomorrow. We've got Ching Ching. I'm really excited for that because Ching Ching was actually part of the Raise.dev pilot. So she has been through Raise.dev in our kind of like secret first phase. So if you have any questions about Raise.dev and how it works, on how it has been for someone who has been through a complete Raise.dev program, definitely come along to our 4 p.m. stream. 4 p.m. CEST stream because Ching Ching will be there. And we also have Will Russell, who I think has also been kicking around. Will Russell's also in the chat. So we also have Will Russell tomorrow. Will is on the late slot. So you can find all that info in the schedule. And as soon as Twitch allows me, I will upload the schedule for the next week. We have some super fantastic guests for next week. I think the only day that's looking a bit quiet is Monday. So Monday, you might be hanging out with me. The rest of the week, we've got some awesome people coming on. I think Dev2 are going to be joining us on Tuesday next week. I'll have to check that day. But they're going to be basically live coding on Forum, the software that powers Dev2. So it's going to be some super exciting stuff coming up next week. If you have questions about Hacktoberfest, you can submit them at our lovely Hacktoberfest Help Desk website, raise.dev/Hacktoberfest. On that website, you will find several things. You'll find a little form you can fill out to get notified. Every day, we will send you an email that tells you who's going to be on stream on that day and what time they're coming on. You can also submit a question. You can submit questions, big or small, high-level questions about like, how do I get started with Hacktoberfest, all the way down to, here is a particular issue URL, help me with this problem. How would you approach this problem? Help me solve this error. There is no question too big or too small. How that works is we review the questions. We find one of our guests who can help with that question, and when we email you telling you what show your question will be answered on, and then after the show we get you the recording, so you have everything you need. So please come along and ask questions there. Also, if anyone in the crowd is like, wow, this was so cool, Joe's so awesome, I want to chat for Joe for an hour and a half, there's a form at the bottom there where you can volunteer to be on the show and come hang out with one of our hosts, whether that be me, whether that be John, whether that be one of the other hosts we've got lined up throughout the month who will soon be revealed. You can do that in there as well. So again, just that link for the schedule. If you want to be notified when we go live, we are going live 3 times a day. So you can either follow us on Twitter, Raise Devs, we're tweeting constantly, or you can follow us here on Twitch and you'll get a notification when we go live. So other than that, last thing for me to briefly talk about is Raise.dev itself. For those of you who are not aware of what Raise.dev is, we are brand new to the world. Someone sent me a message earlier being like, oh, I hadn't heard of Raise before. Where did this come from? We launched on yesterday, 2 days ago. I don't know. It's been a long week. We launched Tuesday, definitely Tuesday. And what we are is coaching, essentially. So if you're looking to take next step in your career and you need advice and guidance from an experienced programmer, we have some wonderful folks at Raise.dev, the Raise.dev coaches, who are here to sit with you, work out your plan, and spend time with you week after week until you get to where you want to be, whether that's a new job, a promotion, a career change, completing a particular project. We are, as I said, like brand new. And right now, whilst we're in early access, the service is free. So you can go get your kickoff call right now. I do believe there is a bit of a queue at the moment as we fit everyone in, but you can apply on the site and get put into that queue. And if you have any questions about that or you're having any issues with the site, I will stress it is early access. And as we've been talking to Will today, products are a journey, folks. So if you have any issues, you can get to us at contact@raise.dev and we will help you out as soon as we can. So yeah, we'll be back in about 4.5 hours with John and Swift. Thank you for hanging out with me and with Will. And thank you again to everyone who's viewing. I will see you later.